back now to Jamila. Jamila, there are a lot of questions, and I think we need to pick it up. But I want to actually start off from some of the questions that had come up during the registration. I know some of them have already answered, but I would just like to read them so that they don't feel not, highlighted. One thing is one question is, I want to know how to overcome long, darker days. I'll club 2-3 of them together. And then another thing is that I would want to learn things and experiences that would help me to engage well with such kind of mental health issues facing students. And also that through the meeting, I can learn to be a reason of hope for those who are hopeless in this dark age. These 3 questions, can you take them, Jamila?
Okay, well, if you want to learn to be a help to students going through these, it's good to inform yourself and maybe read about it or do a short course on it, on counseling or something like that. That will help you. How to get through long, dark days? Well, there is no simple answer to that. Okay, we need to figure out why you're going through long, dark days. Everybody goes through a few. If it's just a one-off, sometimes it happens, then it's all right. Most of us are most of us cycle a little bit in our mood. Some days are bad, some days are good. But if it's a persistent dark mood for many days, 10 to 14 days, then please go and get help. Okay, that is important. Yeah, let's go on, Bonnie.
At times I struggle with inner voice. Is it self-pity or is it humility?
Well, the inner voice could be one's conscience, okay, which tells us sometimes that we are doing right, sometimes we're doing wrong. So is it self-pity? So sometimes we can self-pity or humility.
Yeah.
The question is not clear enough, but our inner voice could be our conscience, which is telling us, whether what we're doing is right or not, sometimes accusing us, sometimes not accusing us, sometimes, appreciating what we're doing in a sense. The inner voice is often the conscience. If you are otherwise divided in your mind, sometimes, you want to do something, but there is an ambivalence. So you love somebody and you also maybe don't like something about them. That conflict could sort of lead to what we call an inner voice, where you're doing something, but inside there is another voice saying another thing. If it continues, it's not a good thing. All right. So there is a prayer in the Bible, after all, that unite my heart to seek your ways. So it's sometimes our mind should go together. A continued ambivalence about many things is something which we need to process and get rid of. Don't persist with ambivalence. That's a good.
Yeah, thank you. I hope the person who asked is here and is listening to you.
Yeah.
The another question is, people getting distressed because of family problem, financial problems, sickness, etc. Some tips how to manage and cope with which will help in giving hope. Practical tips they want on handling these issues.
Practical tips on handling financial issues is to be given by financial experts and not me. Okay, that's not my area of expertise. But then the point is that whatever the problem, and that's where I am bringing hope in, that whatever the problem, we should be able to approach it in a spirit of hope. That is my whole sort of thesis today. That whatever the problem, whatever our situation, if we are facing illness, if we are facing a job loss, for instance, what is the hope that we can have? I think our hope is centered on who God is and what Christ has done for us, right? So if I have a need for a job, I can boldly hope that God, you have placed me on this earth. You have given me life. You have asked me to depend on you for my daily bread. Therefore, I can hope that you will take care of my physical needs. Therefore, I can hope that you will help me to figure out where to work, how to provide for the needs of myself and my family. So this can be our hope. And this hope will drive us. In my paper also, I had added this, that look, hope does not stand by itself. Hope functions with prayer and it drives us to action. All right. So to fulfill that hope, we will be doing something. If we are hopeful that God is going to meet our needs, then we will be praying about it, and we will also be looking for the opportunities, because we believe that God is going to raise those opportunities. So you see, you in any situation, your hope will drive you to depend on God and pray, and also to find the avenue of action which God will help you to walk in.
Yeah, basically translating our knowledge into practical reality, right? Another question is, among Christians, there's a tendency to deal with mental illness using prayer and word alone. When do we know one needs medical care or consultation for a mental condition? And
yeah,
also,
that's an important question, and I'd like to answer that.
Yeah,
See,
linked to that is also one more question.
Yeah.
I want to just link that as well, where somebody asks, how do you convince somebody that they have a mental issue? How to help someone who's not acknowledging that they have a mental health issue? Can these two go together?
Yeah. See, if you have a persistent problem, okay, depressed mood or lack of interest in anything, or unable to sleep for over 10 to 14 days, okay, that is a long period of this. An occasional off day, an occasional anger outburst or whatever, we can deal with. We must deal with prayer, with counsel, with talking to our friends, whatever. But if it is persistent, if it is lasting over, for instance, 10 to 14 days, if it is very severe, all right, if it is, for instance, a violent outburst which causes you to break things in the house, which causes you to get into a police problem, which causes you to break the hand or leg of somebody in the house, if it's violent, if it's very severe, or if it is bizarre, all right, for instance, someone is looking somewhere and saying something, or someone is saying that there are aliens in the house, or someone is saying that there is a camera and it's watching me, okay, so if it is a little bizarre, or if it is tending towards suicide or things like that, so these kind of indications are definitely signs that you need to have professional help from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. This you must do. Persuading someone that they need help is a more difficult task. Okay, first let's deal with ourselves. Now if it is someone else, sometimes it can be very difficult. Hopefully, if you sort of explain patiently that, look, it will help you, I will come along with you, I'm not deserting you, I'm not stigmatizing you, I'm not punishing you, it is something that will help you, I'll come along with you and hold your hand, maybe it will help. Of course, sometimes it is extremely difficult, I know, all right? So in those extremely difficult cases, please take professional help. Again, just go and talk to the professionals and ask them to help you to get the message through. All right?
Yeah, there's a similar question, but I'm going to ask Cherry and Thomas, Jamila's husband, to answer that, because he wanted to answer. How do we cope with tendency to spiritualize all our struggles, especially when we go through the stress of taking care of terminally ill parents? Satish, can you come in?
What?
Sharon?
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, how do we cope with the tendency to spiritualize all our struggles, especially when we go through the stress of taking care of our terminally ill parents? Did I get it wrong? Did I get a message that Shantanu, Raju, and
No, that was my message, Bonnie. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I thought.
No problem.
Yeah, then
it is possible to spiritualize all these issues about end of life. There was another question also from Shantanu about end of life.
I'm here for advice, not to give advice.
Yeah. So actually, there are a lot of issues in end of life and terminally ill patients. Many of them go through all sorts of emotional needs and emotional problems. Some of them hallucinate, some of them go into depression. And yes, often these are ignored or spiritualized. Okay. Now, it is important for us to try and identify what the problem is. Many of these problems can be at least reduced with attention to it, addressing it directly. For instance, if someone is sad or thinking about death, it's important, I think, to at that point talk about death with the person and prepare them for it by, reading from scripture and assuring them of God's presence with them. It's important to do those things. It's also perhaps necessary to give them medication for the pain and for maybe the hallucinations and the depression. So it, again, as ever, it should be an eclectic handling of the problem with all aspects considered, the psychological, the spiritual, and the medical. Do everything together. And that will really help people in the end of life stage. So I think
Jamila, the question is also connected to about the stress that people go through when they are caring for terminal.
Yes, the caregivers also have a lot of issues, and I addressed that briefly. That look, caregivers also go through a lot of burnout and through a lot of stress, and it's important for them to be able to vent this to somebody in the either in the family or outside, to be able to talk about it without anybody getting judgmental on them, as to why they're feeling these things, because it is almost impossible to avoid those feelings. But then yes, the support of the church is also good. The Christian friends just rally around, tell them you're praying for them, occasionally send a message of encouragement, and occasionally maybe give them a break by going and talking to the parents and giving to the end of life, the person who's terminally ill, spending some time with them, or sending some food over so that they don't have the stress of cooking as well as taking care. There's a lot of things that we can do to make the caregiver's life a little easier, give them a break, because it is a very stressful point in their life.
And I think this goes for both, non-terminally, caring for others.
Any chronic care, care of children, care of the chronically ill, it is extremely stressful.
Yeah, I think caring for carers is something that we often forget, I guess, in our busy life, actually. There's a question, Jamila, does the stigma about mental health issues exist among medical professionals as well, as there's so much dearth of psychiatrists in India? Also, Raju says he's heard that many doctors do not want to pursue this field, that they too may get affected seeing and treating so many patients, especially in a residential facility or hospital.
Yeah, the ignorance about psychiatry is common even among the medical field. So yeah, that happens sometimes. But the dearth of psychiatrists is not only because of that. It's also because psychiatry is very highly paid abroad, and many of our psychiatrists leave. So there is a huge dearth of psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, everybody in this field. And I don't know any shortcut to that happening. Maybe again, just being hopeful and challenging young people, young medical professionals, to see this as a need, because it is a huge need. So let's be hopeful, and let us, those of us who are connected with the EMFI and other, medical fields, we can continue to challenge young people to take this up as it's certainly very interesting and a challenging career and profession, and also a ministry to people. And probably that would be the way to go forward.
Jamila, can you just briefly talk a bit about tension and anger issues? Any remedies that you can share for people who struggle with anger issues?
Yeah, tension and anger is often, it's the late term for what we are going through. But if it is persistent, as I said, we need to check that we are not having any other mental disorder, okay, whether it's anxiety, whether it's acute stress disorder, whether it's any of the things which can be helped by some kind of regular therapy or, whatever, medication or whatever. So if it is something persistent and severe, we need to get it treated. If it is one-off, if it is occasional, if it is mild, then by all means, we must accept it to ourselves, okay, and then find ways to understand how, if you look at it psychologically, anger comes from unfulfilled expectations, okay? So what are the expectations of mine which are not being fulfilled, and why are they not being fulfilled? Is it the problem that the expectation is too high, or is there some problem in the way that I'm dealing with that expectation? Okay. Often the issue is that our expectations are too high and they are unrealistic. So if I am to understand this, I may need to talk to someone. If I have a very good self-awareness, I may be able to understand on my own that, okay, my expectation is unrealistic and it's high and I need to reduce my expectation of life. That itself will bring down my anger. That is one issue. Second thing is to understand that I learn behavior from what I have seen, either in my parents or in my surroundings or in the movies I watch or in the books I read. So if I have been brought up in a place which is violent, which unfortunately India is a little bit today, where violence is sort of accepted as the norm. So if I am used to being violent, then if I've seen people around being violent, if I see my dad beating up my mom, then my instinctive reaction also is to be violent, particularly among the male sex, because violence is very much there among the male sex. That's an expression of anger in the male sex. So I need to accept that, understand that, process that, and then work against that. That okay, I choose that I will not react this way with anger. So I'm retraining my impulses to do it a different way. If it's difficult to do it on your own, please go for help. There are any number of counselors, pastoral counselors, all who know how to handle anger issues. Okay. So as I said, the church is doing a lot. There are a lot of people who are willing to help with these kind of issues. So please go and look for the help you need and take it and work on it. Let's be hopeful that we can deal with it. Okay, so that's where hope comes in, that we accept where we are and we hope and pray and act towards change.
Yeah, I know you have been, our point is on hope, but there's a question that asks you, Dr. Chamila, you started by affirming, Reverend Prasad Matthew is saying, Dr. Chamila, you have started by affirming our hope. Also, you have said about perspectives to decide our attitude and responses to different issues in life. Your paper talks about dark times to characterize the present time and the difficult situations. I understand. I felt it as a negative approach to the present times. Why can't we try to approach the time and issues at present with a positive faith and expecting better things tomorrow?
Well, I do accept that we should, we should hope positive things for the tomorrow. But I also think that it's important for us to accept where we are now. And to deny that we are in a slightly tough position now is to not be realistic. I mean, if you just look at it, thousands and millions of people have lost their jobs. Thousands and millions have been pushed back into great poverty. Okay, we are going to be seeing much more probably malnutrition and problems coming up in children and in pregnant women and all that, which will lead to a fresh set of problems. We cannot deny that. The economy is in bad shape. So, we have to accept where we are and then we pray and move and act towards better outcomes. So, I do appreciate that that we should be, have a positive faith. If we are expecting better things tomorrow, yes, we must. But we have to accept where we are now and then, believe that God will help us and we will act towards change. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, the reality always lies. I mean, it's all around us. So there's a question that is linked to it. It says, today as people around the world grapple with hardship and grinding inequalities, many feel confused about how to live happily in the here and now.
Yeah. One thing that's, as I said, we accept where we are. We accept the problem that yes, the world is struggling with COVID. Yes, there are lots of deaths, which probably a lot more people have died than needed to have died, right? Older people may have lived longer if this COVID had not happened. We have lost 1 lakh people in our country. So it is the reality. And yes, there is poverty. Yes, the economy is in trouble. But then I also think that we need to understand that we are small people. And God does not expect us to sort out all the problems in the world. And that is actually very comforting to know that we are required to do what we can in our small way, in our corner of the world, in our family, in our church, in our place of work. Okay, so most of us will have that as our ambit of influence. And we work in that ambit in that area of influence, and we try to do what we can. But we again are hopeful that God is going to be the source from which this is coming. If we are doing it in our own strength and believe that we will be bringing some change, that's when it puts us in further stress. It puts us in the stress of bringing that change. It has to happen. I have to make it happen. And then we're not able to live happily because, the point is, I try my best, but then the world is moving according to God's plan and purposes. We believe that God is sovereign. We believe that ultimately the victory has been won, and ultimately we know that Christ will return, and we have all these the hope of the future is also very much there in our minds, right? And that should also keep us going. That look, the unseen morrow, the day that is coming, that is something to keep our spirits and hopes up. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just moving on from question to question. Would you please elaborate on if mental health illness is a flaw in character or chemistry or biological? And then second, is mental illness a physical event with a spiritual side effects or a spiritual event with physical side effects? Did you get
Okay, interesting question. Yeah, interesting question. Yeah, so what was that first question again? What is the first part again?
Could you please elaborate if mental illness is a flaw in character?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So no, mental illness is not a flaw in character. That's what I was trying to say. It is not a flaw in character. It is an illness. We wouldn't say that a person with a heart attack has a flaw in his character. No, he has a heart attack. That's all. So if someone has bipolar or schizophrenia or something like that, or obsessive compulsive disorder, it's not a flaw in their character. It is an illness. Okay. Yes, there are forms of personality disorders which make people different. They have personality traits which need to be worked on. Okay, so you have things like narcissistic personalities. You have paranoid personalities, schizoid personalities. These also have a kind of genetic basis, okay? But sometimes it happens because of the way they are brought up or things, it's a combination of genes and family upbringing and the person's particular makeup, which makes a personality. But that's not a mental illness. That's what we call personality disorders. And many of us have traits, many people have traits which can be a little troublesome. Okay, is mental illness a physical event with spiritual side effects or a spiritual event with physical side effects? Okay, now the thing is, there you have sort of separated the mental and the spiritual, the mental, the physical and the spiritual. You've sort of separated the three. And you're saying that which is the most important. The issue is that a person is actually all three together. We have to see that a person is one person. I cannot be Jamila. My body and my mind and my spirit are all one. It all goes to make me who I am. My genes are important, okay? They come from my parents on both sides. That goes to make me how tall I am, the color of my eyes, my hair, that comes from my family. Now the other things come from my family, the education, so it's a combination of many things. So you can't separate the three, and so that question is framed implying that there is a separation between these three things. But it's not like that. It's an illness of the whole person with effects in all the areas. Okay, that's the best I can answer that question.
There's a question that I missed earlier. What is bipolar disorder? Is it mandatory for the doctor to involve the spouse in the treatment and medication? How can the spouse be supportive? Is physical abuse also part of bipolar?
Bipolar is, it's basically a medical disorder in the brain, okay, which you basically have two phases of the illness. One is an excited phase and one is a depressed phase. In both the excited as well as a depressed phase, depending on the person's own upbringing and, as I said, what he's been exposed to or she has been exposed to in the past, there may be violence. So physical violence or abuse may become part of the syndrome. It also tends to have a very significant proportion of substance abuse and alcohol addiction and, smoking and drugs and all that, as we saw in the case of Sushant Singh Rajput. And therefore, when substance abuse increases, usually we have seen that there is disinhibition, there's lack of control, and abuse often is part of the syndrome. So it can be part. So it's a it's that kind of an illness. Should the spouse be involved in treatment? Yes, ideally you would expect the spouse to be involved to help in the treatment and to be supportive and sort of help the person to be regular with their medications and to go for whatever counseling and therapy is required. Yes, we would want that to happen. And yes, the spouse has sometimes a very difficult time of it if there is non-compliance, and if there is abuse and all, it can become very difficult. And yes, the spouse or the caregiver needs support. Okay, the whole family needs support. It can be, when untreated, a difficult illness to treat. So the quicker it is treated and the most aggressively that is treated, the better.
Many of the times, the side effects of the medication is usually worse than the disorder itself. My son, who is 15 years, has ADHD and behavioral issues. We did try medication, but didn't actually help.
Well, medications are only as good as as the progress in science is, right? So we cannot expect that if there is not enough research in the field of science, or there's not enough research in psychiatry, that we will get perfect medications. Medications gets better when there is increased research and importance given to illnesses. Okay, so I accept that there are problems in side effects of certain drugs, but the other side, and I want to be hopeful again, is that medications have actually improved a great deal from the past. In the past, the medications had a lot of side effects. Now medications for depression and for schizophrenia and for bipolar have much fewer side effects. ADHD medication is still in the process. Okay, we are still in the process of making it better and better. I do think that in a few years you'll get still better results. So yes, we cannot expect miracles from science when science is not given importance, right? So I would love a world where there is increased focus on research and sort of focus on getting this better and better. As we improve in our science, the medications will get better. It's as simple as that.
In fact, the message on World Mental Health Day was invest more.
Yeah, yeah, correct. We have to do that. Yeah.
And commitment will lead to motivation. Could you to shed some light on the impact of political and social oppression in affecting the mental health of those who are targeted?
Political and social, yeah, that's a good question. They have found, in fact, that in places like Kashmir, the incidence of mental illness is double what it is in the rest of India. So yes, the social trigger factors and the social and physical oppression that is going on in places like Kashmir has led to an increase in mental illness. So yeah, there is, there is no quick answer to that. Yes, it does cause it. We know that it does. We know that mental illness is definitely more among the oppressed. That's why I said it's also more among the poor. Okay. So as we work for a more equitable world, and as we work for justice, and as we fight for the human rights of people, these things will come down.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I have to move from question to question quickly because there's so many. Is there any scientific evidence that the frequent use of social media causes depression or mental disorders?
There have been studies which showed that social media, for instance, puts a completely wrong picture of life. Okay. So people put up pictures of themselves enjoying things and doing things and achieving things. So it's a very one-sided portrait which is sort of put up. And if we are listening to this all the time, we can tend to feel very insecure about ourselves and sort of suffer from self-esteem issues. So there have been studies which showed that this has happened. Also, it can have a bad effect because a lot of social media, there's name calling and bullying and trolling. So that can have a negative effect. But at the same time, social media can be very useful when used wisely. So obviously the issue is, again, not banning social media, but the wise use of it and regulated use of it, and being aware again of its effect on us, and if required, taking a holiday every now and then, and things like that.
Okay. I hope, I'm just asking this question to the larger audience since the conversation is so important. I hope we can stretch it a few minutes more then, because our time is actually coming to an end. But I'm going to continue with the questions. Our hope is based on who God and what Jesus did, but the church at large, including me, seem to take away the hope. How to handle this?
Well, becoming aware of this is the crux of it, isn't it? So if we are aware that this is happening, that we are losing our hope by not focusing on God and not focusing on who Christ is and what he has done for us. So we talk about it, we encourage each other, we remind ourselves that this is who God is, and this is his intention towards us. He means us only good. He wants to redeem the world. He wants to reconcile the whole world to himself. There is a time coming when the Lord will return and renew all things. So this is our great hope for the future. And also for the present, we know that Christ is in us. He is renewing us. He has made us a new creation. Okay, he promises to listen to us, to care for us, to work through us, to use us as his ambassadors. So we are both the objects of his compassion as well as the agents of change who God himself uses to reach the world. So all this can be, as I have said, very very encouraging and exhilarating.
Yeah. Actually, Jamila, it's very good to hear you, because you're constantly reiterating how we should actually bring our faith into action, in fact, because not to compartmentalize it and not bring into action. One question here is...
Yeah, but it's always a struggle, Bonnie. I don't want to give the impression that it's all easy, okay? It's a constant struggle. We have to constantly remind ourselves. I struggle with it myself. It's a constant struggle. There are always issues. There are always times of despair which come up, and problems and issues. But then we keep reminding ourselves, picking ourselves up, going back to the Lord, and that way.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Yeah, that's true. Coming to the question again, though, I want to say something myself, but I want to go to the question. How do we deal with the growing number of youngsters that have become entrenched in extreme ideologies of nationalism and its counterpart? Should such a trend be viewed as a form of mental issue aggravated by the information overload from social media?
Interesting. Can it be seen as a mental health issue? Well, it's certainly a sort of brainwashing for sure. Yeah, isn't it? There's been a sort of concerted attempt over the last many decades to portray, one community as evil and one community as the other, and to portray one version of religion as the religion of India. And there's been a sort of concerted attempt to say that violence is okay to sort of get what we want, that kind of Rajya, that kind of government that we want. It's okay to use violence. We actually have had people teaching that. So there is certainly a lot of brainwashing. And brainwashing, is it a mental illness? Well, it's not exactly a mental illness, but it's certainly fiddling with the mind. Okay, so there is a concerted attempt to change people's thinking. In a sense, you could call it a mental, in the sense that it is a mob reaction. Okay, so psychologists have studied this, mob behavior. Mob behavior, you can't call it a mental illness exactly, but it's certainly a mental phenomenon. Where in a mob, people behave differently from what they behave as individuals. So in a mob, you lose your own sense of direction, you lose your own sense of choice, and you tend to move as the mob moves. So often mobs can be very brutal, and mobs, there'll be one or two persons who become the leaders and the others unquestioningly follow them. So there is a sort of shedding of your choice and your own principles. So it is certainly fiddling with the mind. It's not exactly a mental illness, but it's certainly it's a very psychological phenomenon that we are seeing. And yes, it is very widespread and it's very disturbing. And I think the only thing to do to break it is to teach consistently and at one-to-one as much as we can, at one-to-one levels with these young people, particularly young men. So we talk to them one-to-one so that we can sort of question these assumptions and help them understand what is going on.
Thank you. That's helpful. Jamila, is there any guidance available for family members who are dealing with mental illness in the family? If not, is it something we should be looking at to be put together? And then, As a spouse, as a parent, as a sibling, is it important to have some guidance on what to do and what not to do?
Actually, almost always, if you go for help, there will be someone who will counsel the families. That is pretty routine in most hospitals and in most counseling centers. Okay, so by all means, if there is someone who's going through mental illness, the family should be counseled. The family, if it doesn't happen, please go and ask for it. That I would like to spend some time asking you how I should behave and what I should do and what I can do to help the person to get better quickly or to help the situation improve as fast as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jamila. Can you also share your view on EQ, like thought management, identity cognitive distortions, mindfulness, meditation, self-actualization, etc., in dealing with mental illness?
Yeah, there are a whole host of therapies these days. If you count the number of therapies available, probably it would be in the hundreds. Okay, so new things keep coming up and people keep doing slightly different things and it gets a different name and you start doing it. Many of them are quite helpful in limited ways for limited problems. So don't worry too much about it. EQ, if you talk about EQ, was it EQ that you asked about?
Yeah,
the first thing? Yeah. See, EQ is the whole emotional quotient business, and developing EQ in your children is something which, well, we never talked about it as EQ in the past, but certainly it's something which all parents try to instill in their children by asking the children to be aware of their emotions. Okay, so you're teaching the children to accept their emotions. Often this is not done, but it's good to do that. That if a child is angry, it's all right to say that, look, you're angry, it's okay to be angry. Or you say, you look a little sad today, something like that. So you are helping the child to identify and understand emotions. You're also helping them to be aware of emotions in other people. So you sort of say that, okay, your sister is looking sad today. What can you go and cheer her up? Or I think your brother is upset. He failed his exam. Let's do something to make him feel better. So you're helping them to identify emotions in others. All right. So that is the second part. Now, the third part would probably be to learn to regulate your emotions. Okay. So if a child is angry and having a tantrum, then we need to sort of tell them that you're angry. I understand you're angry, but you're not allowed to throw things or do things. So I would expect you to say sorry for this. So you're sort of helping them to control and regulate their anger or whatever, their emotion. So this is how parents should train children to understand, be aware of their own emotions and regulate their emotions, and also be aware of other people's emotions. That is what an emotional intelligence is. Okay. What was the other thing? Mindfulness and other therapies. No. So as I said, there are a lot of therapies these days. There will be dance therapies, mindfulness therapies. So many therapies are there. Okay. So as I said, most of them are helpful in limited ways for limited problems. There's no problem. Go ahead and figure out each one. Okay. And pick out whichever helps you and go for it. Okay. But never forget to keep the Lord central, okay, in whatever you're doing. Ultimately, don't forget the spiritual part as well.
Yeah, Jamila, earlier, of
medical
course,
part as well, if you need it. Yeah.
Yeah, earlier, of course, you lived in Delhi. There's a question that's, asks you that usually psychiatrists are very expensive. Are there any places in Delhi for Christians to get help from mental health professional at subsidized rates? And also added to it, I want to ask you, like, would you recommend some organizations or resources, website or apps that can actually be helpful these days?
Well, actually, we are coming out with a list of organizations, Christian organizations who are into counseling and all that. So that list should be out soon, and we'll pass it on to Tracy as it gets completed. I'm sure we'll keep adding to it. That's one way. Secondly, about psychiatrists who are affordable, I think you have sort of private psychiatrists are expensive, no doubt, but then you must understand that it also happens because psychiatrists tend to spend long with the patient if it is therapy. So if you're spending 1 hour with the patient, then you can only see maximum 8 patients a day, right? the psychotherapist. So 8 to 10 patients a day. So that is why it is more expensive than a specialty where you can see someone in 10 minutes and finish. So that's the reason. But then there are the government systems which are much cheaper. So you can go to a government hospital. Most of the time, government hospitals do give good care. The only thing is they won't smile at you, and they won't spend time giving you all the the 5-star comforts or how can I help you and all that. They will quickly get to the point and deal with it because of the pressure of people. But actually the treatment is not bad. So if you can't afford, by all means go to a government hospital. Also the Christian hospitals are there which tend to be cheaper. Okay, there are other trust hospitals which tend to be cheaper. So you can go to those places. That will help you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jamila, for answering all these questions. And there are a lot more questions coming up. So what I'd like to do now is for us to maybe officially close in prayer and then leave the room, the Zoom platform open so that people can ask questions and we can pick up some other questions that are still there. Would that be okay, Jamila?
That's okay with me, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so thank you so much. Actually, the whole conversation has been very helpful. And I hope the awareness that you have brought in today will really help people as they move forward. And how you had written in your paper that there are, there are ironic points of light. And I hope that today's conversation will really help us. I think our audience is from right across the country, dotted everywhere, and so we will be that affirming flame wherever we are. And to that end, may God help us. And so